Sasha called me at 5:43 to say she wasn't going to make it back before midnight. I was in the mudroom taking off my boots when the phone rang, and I just sat there on the long bench with one boot in my hand, listening to her explain that Route 18 was shut down near Verona because of a pileup, that she'd try cutting through on 14, that it would take longer but she'd get there. Her voice had that tight, careful quality of someone trying to sound calm. 7 years of marriage and I still don't think she knows I notice. Everything's fine here, I said. Drive safe. Outside, the snow was falling in a different way. Not like normal snow. It felt like pressure, something pushing down on the house from above. I heard it before I saw it. A weight in the silence, the branches of the oak on the north side creaking in a rhythm that didn't match the wind. The porch light barely reached the edge of the gravel yard. Beyond that, nothing. Just dark. 3 minutes later, the power went out. Owen was in the kitchen when it happened. He didn't yell, didn't call for me. When I got there with the big flashlight, he was standing by the window, both hands flat against the glass, his breath fogging the center of the pane right at face level. 9 years old, and sometimes the way he reacts to things, that stillness, catches me off guard. Sasha says it's just how he is. Maybe so. What are you looking at? I asked. He took a second. Nothing. I thought I saw something. I thought it was Mom, but it looked too big. What did? I don't know. It was gone. I didn't push it. I lit the white candles from the drawer by the stove, heated up the soup on the gas burner, set out the bowls. Owen ate without talking. I tried calling Merle Hess, our nearest neighbor, a farm about half a mile down County Road F, to find out if the outage had hit the whole area, but his landline just rang. Cell had no signal, which wasn't surprising out there when the temperature tanks. The generator was in the barn, about 40 yards from the back of the house. I was going to have to go out. I finished my soup, put on my heavy coat, and grabbed the smaller flashlight to leave the big one with Owen. When I opened the mudroom door, the cold came in like something solid. 14 below out there, maybe 16 with the wind chill. The snow on the porch was untouched. The gravel yard was covered, white and flat, without a single footprint. I stepped down off the 2 steps and stopped. There was nothing, just the wind, the diagonal snow, the shadow of the barn out ahead of me. But I stood there anyway, flashlight pointed across the yard, unable to make myself take that first step. 44 years in Wisconsin, I've gone out to check on a generator on worse nights than that one. It wasn't the cold that stopped me. It was the silence from the Hess dogs, 2 Australian shepherds that bark at everything, cars, coyotes, heavy wind. That night, not a sound from that direction. I know they stay inside when it gets that cold. I know that, but I kept staring into the dark longer than I needed to. I went back inside without turning on the generator. Owen was sitting on the bench in the mudroom when I came in, which surprised me. He never hung around in there. Nothing to do in that room except coats and boots. He had his knees pulled up to his chest, staring at the small window in the back door. Single pane, maybe 8 by 12 inches, with frost collecting along the edges from the cold. Owen. He turned to look at me slowly. His face was closed off in a way that wasn't quite normal for him. That window, he said. Does it fog up on the inside or the outside? I looked at the glass. Frost on the edges, the center mostly clear. Normal for that kind of cold. Both sides. Why? He held my gaze for a second, like he was deciding whether to say something. Then he climbed down from the bench and said he was going to brush his teeth. I stood alone in the mudroom with the flashlight pointed at the floor. I heard his footsteps going up the stairs. I heard the house making the sounds an old house makes in the cold. Wood contracting, a thin moan from somewhere in the roof joints. Then I looked at the little window. In the lower left corner of the glass, there was a mark that wasn't frost. Denser than that, with an edge that ran slightly warmer, that translucent yellowish color that heat leaves when it's been pressed against cold glass for too long. Regular condensation spreads out evenly. This had a shape, concentrated, oval, wider in the middle, like someone had leaned their forehead against it from the outside. I stood there looking at it for a long time. Then I switched off the flashlight, sat down on the mudroom bench in the dark, and listened to the snow hitting the outside of the door. No sound of footsteps, nothing. but I didn't get up for a good long while. Owen didn't say another word about the window that night. He didn't say much about anything. The next morning he came down the stairs at his own pace, slow, unhurried, like the world waited for him and he knew it. He sat in his usual chair, the one on the left, and stared out at the backyard through the kitchen window while I heated water on the gas stove for coffee. Outside, the snow had stopped around 3 in the morning. The sky was a flat, sealed white, the kind that doesn't promise anything good, and the snow had piled up a little over a foot in the yard. You could see where the wind had shaped it into long curves along the pasture fence. I tried Sasha at 7:15. The call dropped before it connected. Tried again at 7:22. Same thing. No cell signal is something you accept out in that area during the summer. In the winter, during a storm, with your wife trying to get home on Route 14, it's a different thing entirely. I made scrambled eggs, put some bread on the griddle. Owen ate without complaining, which was unusual. He normally has opinions about scrambled eggs. That morning he was somewhere else. "Did you sleep?" I asked. "Yeah." "Okay." He lifted one shoulder, wiped his mouth with the napkin and stared at his plate for a second before he spoke. "Caleb, that thing I saw through the window last night." I waited. It seemed off, like it was bent wrong. It didn't move like a regular person. I set my cup down on the table. "What did you see, Owen?" He chose his words carefully, the way kids do when they want to be taken seriously and aren't sure they will be. He said he'd been looking out the kitchen window before the power went out, when it was still light enough to see the porch. He said he saw something outside near the edge of the porch toward the yard. Tall, wide in the shoulders, hunched in a way that didn't look natural. Hunched how? He thought about it. Like when you carry something heavy, except there was nothing in its arms. I asked if he'd seen a face. He said no, it was too dark and too far. He said the thing stood still for a while and then moved off toward the barn. I let him finish without interrupting. Then I told him it could have been Merle Hess, that the neighbors sometimes cut across the property before a storm to check the section of pasture fence that bordered his farm. Owen looked at me with that expression I've learned to recognize. The one he gets when he thinks I'm saying what I think he wants to hear, not what I actually believe. "It was too tall to be Merle," he said. I didn't say anything to that. I got up, washed the dishes, and told him to bundle up because I was going to need help clearing a path through the snow to the barn. The generator had to be turned on. I'd avoided going out the night before for a reason I still couldn't quite name, and that was bothering me. I'm a practical man. Avoiding something for a reason I can't name isn't how I operate. We headed out the back at 8:30. The cold was dry and dense, the kind that dries out your nose in 2 minutes. Owen walked behind me, stepping in my tracks to save effort. He does that on his own, without anyone showing him, and I think it's the most sensible thing about him. We crossed the yard, went through the post fence, reached the barn. The padlock on the side door was locked, the way I'd left it. I opened it with the key from the utility ring, went in, clicked on the flashlight. The generator was in the right-hand corner, covered with the tarp I put over it in the winter. I lifted the tarp and stopped. The tarp was folded differently than I'd left it. It hadn't been dragged or torn. It was folded, with that specific crease that shows up when someone grabs the fabric by the center and pulls it to one side before letting go. I always fold it the same way. Long fold facing the wall, edges tucked under the generator. Now the edges were out, and the fold was facing me. I stood there looking at it for about 10 seconds. Owen came in behind me and went straight for the old equipment hanging on the back wall. Rusty horseshoes, leather straps, things that were there when we bought the place and that I'd never touched because I didn't know if they mattered to anyone. He likes looking at those things. Says they look like something out of a Western. I didn't say anything about the tarp. It could have been nothing. I started the generator, waited for it to catch, listened to the rumble level out, folded the tarp back the right way, and tucked the edges under the chassis. Then I walked to the door and looked over the dirt floor around the generator. No footprints. The ground was dry and packed the way it always was. Nothing to suggest anyone had been in there. But the tarp was different. I'm sure of it. On the way back to the house, Owen walked beside me instead of behind. I don't know if that was chance or if he felt something. Probably chance. He's a 9-year-old kid and I was projecting. The power came back on at 9:11. I tried Sasha again. This time she picked up. She was at a gas station on Route 14 near Mount Horeb, waiting for a convoy of salt trucks to pass so she could follow behind them. She said the road was bad but passable, that she'd be home by lunch. I hung up and looked out the kitchen window at the barn at the far end of the yard. The side door was shut, the way I'd left it, but I kept looking anyway. Sasha got home at 2:40 in the afternoon. I heard her car in the driveway before I saw it. Her Subaru makes a thin whine in the transmission when she shifts down to second on an incline, and I know that sound the way I know the creak of the third stair. I went to the mudroom and opened the door before she reached the porch. Her face looked the way it does after hard driving. Jaw locked, shoulders up, that line between her eyebrows that doesn't go away until she's had coffee and 20 minutes of sitting without needing to do anything. Owen hugged her in the kitchen longer than usual, his face buried in her wet jacket. She looked at me over the top of his head with a question in her eyes. I shook my head. Everything was fine. The afternoon went the way afternoons go after a scare that didn't turn into something worse. Sasha showered. I warmed up soup. The three of us sat down for dinner. We talked about the roads, about the pileup on 18, about the neighbor on Route 14 who had his tractor stalled on the shoulder and wouldn't take help when she stopped. At no point did I mention the tarp. It wasn't a deliberate decision. What would I have said exactly? That the generator tarp was folded differently and that I'd spent the whole afternoon staring out the window because of it. It sounds like nothing when you put it into words, and it was probably nothing, except it still didn't sit right. After Sasha and Owen went to bed, I stayed in the kitchen for another hour without any clear purpose. Washed the dishes slowly, made another pot of coffee I didn't need, sat in the chair facing the back window. The yard was lit up by the porch light. Snow untouched since morning, mine and Owen's tracks going to the barn and back, the wind softening the edges. Nothing else. I caught myself watching and stopped. Went to bed. I woke up before the alarm, 5:40. Came downstairs, made coffee, went to the window before anything else, and stopped with the cup in my hand. On the right side of the yard, there was a line of marks in the snow that hadn't been there the night before. It came from the direction of the north fence, ran parallel to the barn wall, and disappeared into the dark corner between the barn and the wood pile. I grabbed my coat and went out. The cold at 5:40 on that kind of morning is a different kind of cold. No wind, no falling snow, just temperature hanging still in the air. I got to the marks and crouched down. They weren't animal tracks I recognized. They were compressions in the snow, irregular, spaced farther apart than I would have expected. I stayed there crouched over them for a while, unable to fit them into any category I knew. Then I straightened up and followed the line with my eyes to the corner between the barn and the woodpile. I walked over there. On the ground in that corner, there was a section of packed down snow that was different from the rest, like something had stood there long enough to compress everything under its own weight. The wheelbarrow was where it belonged. The coiled hose was where it belonged. Only the snow was different. I went back inside. I didn't go up to Sasha right away. I stood in the mudroom for a while with my coat still on, looking at the small window in the back door. The sky outside was starting to go light in that gray-blue way of winter mornings in Wisconsin. The yard was quiet, and it was there, in that silence, that something finally settled in for good. It wasn't what Owen said he saw. He's a 9-year-old kid who a month ago told me with complete conviction that an albino mole was living under the barn. I listened to Owen, but I listened with a filter. It wasn't the mark on the little window, which could have been anything. It wasn't the silence from the Hess dogs who stay inside when it gets that cold. It was the tarp. And now these tracks. Two things with no explanation that held up. And when you're a practical man, when you've spent 20 years solving concrete problems with concrete solutions, two things with no explanation don't add up to doubt. They add up to a certainty that something is wrong. I went upstairs, changed, came back down. Sasha was already in the kitchen making coffee. She looked at me when I walked in. "Did you sleep?" "Not really," I said, which was true. She studied me for a second. I know that look. It's the look of someone deciding whether to ask more or let it go. This time she let it go, turned back to the stove, and I sat down at the table and looked out the window at the yard again. The daylight showed the tracks more clearly than I would have liked. They came in from the open field, crossed the yard, and disappeared into the corner of the barn. Straight. No hesitation, no deviation, as if whatever had made them knew exactly where it was going. And then a thought came that I pushed aside immediately, but that kept coming back for the rest of the day. The tracks weren't heading toward the house. They were heading toward the barn, where I had been alone the night before, with the flashlight, with my back to the open door. I didn't tell Sasha about the tracks. I went through the whole day with it, watching her and Owen move through their Saturday routine. Her folding laundry in the living room, him trying to fit the wing onto the Mustang fuselage with a patience he doesn't have for anything else. And I didn't say a word. It wasn't cowardice. It was that I was still trying to figure out what I'd even have to say. That I saw compressions in the snow. That I didn't recognize the pattern. That I stood in the mudroom in my coat for too long staring at an empty yard. That sounds like a man who had a rough night and is looking for a way to justify his own state of mind. So I kept quiet and watched the day go by. The sky never broke. The temperature climbed just enough to make the snow on the roof slide off in heavy slabs that hit the porch with a solid thud. Owen flinched the first time he heard it. Sasha laughed. I went to the window to check where the sound had come from before I understood what it was. And Sasha gave me that look again. That quiet, measuring look. Late in the afternoon, she asked if I wanted to drive over to Hess's to borrow his auger, since mine had a loose handle and I needed to drill through the cover on well number 2 before the thaw. I said it could wait. She said that was fine, and went back to what she was doing, and I knew she'd noticed something was off with me but had chosen not to push. That's one of the reasons the marriage works. After dinner, with Owen already in his room and Sasha reading in bed, I went back to the kitchen under the excuse of checking the stove. I stood at the window for about 10 minutes. The yard was lit up. The day's snowfall had covered the morning's tracks, and there was a small, embarrassed relief in that. I turned off the porch light, which I never do, and went to bed. I woke up at 2:17 in the morning with Sasha beside me and the house silent. It wasn't a sound that woke me. It wasn't a dream. It was that kind of wakefulness that comes from inside, like when your body decides it's rested enough and doesn't bother to tell the rest of you. I lay on my back in the dark for a minute listening to her breathing, the occasional creak of wood, the low wind outside. Then I heard something else. It was hard to tell where it was coming from. Not inside the house, it was outside, muffled by the wall, the glass, the snow. A slow, heavy, steady sound with that specific quality of something pressing down into a soft surface. Like footsteps in deep snow. More like a dragging. No hurry at all. I sat up slowly without waking Sasha. Went to the bedroom window, which faces the north side of the house, and stood behind the curtain looking out. Complete darkness. I'd turned off the porch light, and without it the north yard was a shapeless black smear. The sound went on for maybe 30 seconds. Then it stopped. I stayed at the window longer than the sound lasted. Nothing moved outside that I could see. I went back to bed, lay down, stared at the ceiling. Sasha rolled onto her side without waking up and rested her hand on my arm in her sleep. That unconscious habit she has. Normally, I don't even register it. That night, I looked at her hand for a long time. In the morning, I woke to the house smelling like pancakes. Sasha makes pancakes on Sundays when she wants to mark the day as different from the rest. A habit she got from her mother. Owen was already at the table when I came down, fork in hand, with the expression of someone who has waited long enough and feels he deserves recognition for it. I poured coffee, sat down, ate. The conversation was about the coming week, about Owen's school meeting on Thursday, about the east gutter that was pulling loose at one end and needed fixing before the thaw. Sunday farm talk. Normal. After coffee, I went to the mudroom alone. I opened the back door slowly and checked the porch before stepping down. The snow on the right side of the porch was disturbed, near the edge, where the wood planks end and the covered gravel begins. It wasn't clean fallen snow. It was trampled, packed down, with that granular texture that shows up when something stands on top long enough for the snow to melt slightly and refreeze. I stepped down and walked over to it. The mark was large, wider than my own foot, irregular in shape, with more pressure at one end than the other. It sat at the edge of the porch facing the yard, as if something had been standing there looking toward the house, toward the mudroom window. I crouched there looking at it for a while. The cold came up through the gravel, worked its way through the seams of my boots, and I didn't move. I was trying to balance an account that hadn't balanced in 3 days. The tarp, the tracks in the yard, the sound in the middle of the night, and now this. Each thing on its own was nothing. Coincidence, bad perception, a few poor nights of sleep. Together they formed a line, and the line pointed in the same direction. I went back inside, closed the door, stood in the mudroom for a moment with my hand still on the knob, looking through the small window at the empty porch. And I thought clearly and directly, as if someone had spoken out loud inside my head. It stood here looking in. From the kitchen came Sasha's voice, asking if I wanted more coffee. Yeah, I said, and I went in there. That Sunday afternoon I tried Merle Hess 3 times. Landline, no answer. Cell, no signal. The nearest tower is out on Route 151, and when the temperature drops below -20, coverage disappears in dead zones all along County Road F. I knew that before I tried, but I tried anyway because I needed to hear the voice of someone who lived half a mile away and ask, casually, whether he'd noticed anything unusual in the past few days. I didn't need to be specific. I just needed to know if it was only me. I thought about driving over. The truck was in the garage, the engine had turned over fine that morning. Route 14 was passable according to Sasha. But the snow had come back in the early afternoon, light and steady, and the stretch of dirt road between my property and the Hess fence drifts into a ditch when the wind comes from the north. With 18 below and low visibility, I'd make it there and back in 40 minutes or get stuck halfway with no working cell. I put it off until Monday. What I had was what I had. The house, the family, and the Remington 870 that sits in the upstairs hallway closet behind the winter coats, with a box of heavy shot shells on the bottom shelf. I bought it 5 years ago when we started having coyote trouble in the east pasture. Never had to use it on anything but coyotes. It's a good gun, simple, reliable, the kind of thing you want in your hands when you're not sure what you're dealing with. I took it down from the closet that Sunday night, after Sasha and Owen went to bed. Checked the action, loaded it with 4 shells, left the rest of the box alongside it, leaned it back against the wall inside the closet, but without latching the door, within reach. I didn't tell Sasha, not because she would have been against it. She grew up on a farm in Richland County. She understands what it means to keep a gun in the house out of necessity, not preference. But telling her meant explaining, and explaining meant saying out loud what I was still trying not to say even to myself. That what was out there wasn't any animal I recognized, that it was coming back, that the deep snow and the cold that cut off contact with any neighbor left me alone with a woman, a child, and a shotgun inside a decision radius that seemed to get smaller every day. Monday morning, the snow had stopped. The sky was clear for the first time in 4 days, that dry, cloudless winter blue that bounces off the snow and hurts your eyes. Owen went out on the porch before breakfast in his orange jacket and stood looking out at the field like he was seeing snow for the first time. He does that sometimes, stops everything for a detail most people walk right past. And I think that's a good thing about him even when it's inconvenient. I didn't let him go past the porch. I told him it was too cold without a balaclava, which was true, and he came back inside without arguing. But he looked at me in a way that told me he hadn't entirely bought it. I went to the barn alone. The tracks in the yard were buried under the new snow. Clean ground, untouched, white in every direction. I reached the barn, unlocked the side door, went in. The tarp was the way I'd left it, fold facing the wall, edges tucked under. It hadn't been touched. The dirt floor was clean. The north side window was closed, latch in place. I walked to the back wall and stood looking at that window for a while. Outside it, there was a narrow space between the barn and the wire fence of the east pasture, maybe 6 feet wide. The snow in that space was different from the snow in the yard. It wasn't the clean surface of a fresh fall. It was worked over snow, uneven, with that trampled texture that comes from being stepped on and covered and stepped on again. I opened the window and leaned out. There were tracks out there, recent ones made before last night's snow, because they had that thin new layer on top that preserves the shape without erasing it. Irregular marks with the same wide spacing I'd seen before. They came from the north fence, ran down the narrow corridor between the barn and the wire, and ended just below the window itself, right below where I was leaning. I pulled the window shut, latched it, which I never do, left through the barn, snapped the padlock closed, and walked back to the house at a steady pace without stopping to look at anything. In the kitchen, Sasha was with Owen, explaining something about the airplane model. I came in, pulled off my boots, hung up my coat, poured coffee, sat down at the table with them. "Did you get a hold of Merle?" she asked. "Not yet. I'll try again later." She nodded. Owen was completely locked in on the airplane, the tip of his tongue sticking out of the corner of his mouth, which is what shows up when he's really concentrating. I sat there for about 20 minutes without saying much. The house was warm, bright, smelled like coffee. The shotgun was in the upstairs hallway closet with 4 shells in it, and the rest of the box right beside it. 1 man, 1 woman, 1 child, and something outside that had stood beneath the barn window looking in, the night before, while I slept 40 yards away without knowing. The cold kept everyone inside. The cold also kept everyone inside the same tight radius. I didn't know if that was good or bad. Monday afternoon I got a hold of Merle Hess, not by phone. I drove over in the truck down County Road F, with the sky still open and the road passable while the window of daylight held. Merle is 68, widowed 4 years ago, lives alone on a property that used to be large and has been shrinking as his kids moved away. He's the kind of man who measures his words the way you measure fuel. Nothing wasted, nothing short. When I pulled up, he was on his porch fixing a tractor belt with bare hands in the cold, which tells you everything you need to know about him. I asked casually whether he'd noticed anything unusual in the past few days. Large animal, movement near the fences, anything. He stopped with the belt in his hand and looked at me. "Like what?" "I'm not sure exactly," I said. "Tracks in the snow I didn't recognize." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said his dogs had been restless Thursday night before the storm, that he'd gone out with a flashlight and didn't find anything, but that they hadn't settled down until almost midnight. He said he figured it was a coyote, but that his dogs react differently to coyotes. They bark outward toward the sound. Thursday night they stood at the back porch door, staring into the dark without making a sound. "Just watching?" I asked. "Just watching," he said. I didn't say anything more than I needed to. I thanked him, went back to the truck, and drove home along County Road F with white fields on both sides and the low sun cutting across at an angle. I kept thinking about Thursday. Thursday was before the storm, before the power went out, before the fogged-up window, before the tarp. Whatever it was had been in the area before anything I'd noticed. I got home, put the truck in the garage, came in through the front. Sasha was in the office with the door half open, working on her laptop. Owen was in the living room with the airplane model finally assembled, painting the fuselage with those tiny acrylic paint pots that stain everything. I said I was back, she answered without taking her eyes off the screen. He held up the P-51 Mustang for me to see the progress. "Looks good," I said. He nodded with the gravity of someone receiving a professional assessment. Dinner, Owen's bath, the usual routine. The night was quiet, the cold steady, the wind low. I slept better than the nights before, which I chalked up to accumulated exhaustion, and not to any real improvement in the situation. It was Tuesday in the early hours that the mudroom door gave way. It wasn't a break-in. It was the frame. The old wood on the bottom frame that's been taking on winter moisture for years. The one I always say I'm going to fix and never do. Extreme cold makes it contract and the latch releases, and when the wind comes hard enough from the south, the door swings open on its own. It's happened before. I know the sound it makes. That bang of a door thrown open and hitting the mudroom wall, followed by the wind rushing in. so when I heard the bang at 2:42, my first thought was the frame. I got up without waking Sasha, grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand, left the room. The hallway was cold, noticeably colder than it should have been. That drop in temperature that happens when there's an opening somewhere. I stopped at the closet, unlatched the door, grabbed the shotgun, went downstairs. The mudroom door was open. The wind moved it slightly in the frame, that slow drift of a door with nothing holding it. Outside, the yard was lit by moonlight. Clear sky, no falling snow. The light bouncing off the white surface with a strange, almost photographic brightness. I could see the entire yard from the doorway. The post fence, the barn at the far end, the open fields on either side. Nothing there. I stood in the doorway with the shotgun in my right hand and the flashlight in my left, looking out at the yard for a stretch of time I can't measure. The cold came in through the back of my neck, my wrists, the gap in my sock on the frozen floor. The door drifted. Then I heard the breathing. It wasn't coming from inside the house. It was outside, close, on the right side of the porch, in the shadow along the wall where the moonlight didn't reach. Heavy breathing with that moisture of a large animal, the kind of sound you feel before you hear it. Steady, unhurried. I didn't move. In those moments, the body decides before the mind does. My body said, don't turn on the flashlight, don't draw attention to the movement, stay exactly where you are. I stayed. The shotgun was in my hand, and my finger was outside the trigger guard because firing into the dark at a sound you can't see isn't something you do, no matter how much you want to. The breathing went on for maybe 20-30 seconds. Then it was gone. Not gradually. It was a cutoff, like someone clamping a hand over a microphone. 1 second there was that heavy, wet breathing in the dark corner of the porch, and the next there was nothing but the low wind and the silence of snow. I waited a while longer. Nothing. I closed the mudroom door. There was a piece of 2x4 I used to brace the garage door. It had been leaning against the kitchen wall for a long time. One of those things you leave in the wrong place and it just stays there. I grabbed it and wedged it under the mudroom door handle. It wasn't going to hold anything that wanted in badly enough, but it would slow things down, make noise, buy time. I went into the mudroom with the flashlight low. The floor was wet, not soaked, not pooled. Damp, the kind of dampness that comes from snow melting off something that stood too long in a cold place. It started at the door threshold and spread toward the center of the mudroom, like a trail from something that had come inside and stood there before pulling back. I crouched down with the flashlight. The dampness had a shape. It wasn't a uniform runoff. It was pooled with edges, like a shallow puddle that holds the form of whatever stood in it. Too large to be boot drips. Too large to be anything I wanted to name right at that moment. I stayed crouched there looking at it for a long time. Then I got up, went upstairs, walked back into the bedroom. Sasha was asleep on her side, her face relaxed, breathing deep. Owen was in his room. I could hear the sound of the humidifier he uses in winter for his sinuses. That low, steady hum that Sasha says is irritating, and that I find reassuring because it means he's in there. I sat on the edge of the bed with the shotgun across my lap. I stayed like that for a stretch of time I won't be able to estimate, thinking about Merle and his dog standing at the porch door watching the dark without barking, thinking about the tarp, the tracks in the yard, the little window, the breathing outside, thinking about how the cold kept everyone inside, neighbors included, and how County Road F at 3 in the morning was a stretch of asphalt with nobody on it for miles. One man, one woman, one child, a shotgun with 4 shells and the rest of the box in the closet, and a puddle of melted snow on the mudroom floor that hadn't been there when I went to bed. When the sky started to go light, I was still awake. In the morning, I didn't say anything about the night. Sasha came down early, before Owen, and found me in the kitchen with the coffee already made and the shotgun leaning against the wall next to the utility cabinet, where it doesn't normally live. She looked at the gun, then at me, and stood in the kitchen doorway for a second. "Caleb, there was a noise outside in the middle of the night," I said. The mudroom door came open. The frame again. I went to check. And? Didn't see anything. She held my gaze longer than the answer deserved. Then she went to the stove and started making eggs without another word, which meant she hadn't completely believed me but was picking her moment to follow up. Owen came down at 7:30, grabbed the P-51 Mustang off the shelf, and studied the paint job with that critical expression he gets when he thinks he could have done better. Coffee, eggs, toast, routine. I needed the CB radio in the truck. Not nostalgia, not some old farmer habit, it's a tool. When the cell signal disappears and the neighbor's landline goes unanswered, the CB covers the gaps. There are truckers on Route 14 all the time. There's the Clevenville station that still monitors Channel 19. There's Daryl Coons, who worked with me for 8 years and lives about 12 miles toward Verona and never turns his radio off. If I could reach someone, anyone, just to say where I was and that there was something on the property I couldn't identify. The truck was in the garage. The garage is on the east side of the house, side door, maybe 15 yards from the mudroom. In daylight, with a clear sky, 15 yards is 15 yards. But it was the open space between that kept stopping me. I carried that with me all day Tuesday. The sky closed in again early afternoon. Light snow came back. The temperature dropped to -22. Owen stayed inside without complaining because there was nothing out there worth -22. Sasha baked bread, which she does when she's anxious, and went quiet the way she does when she's waiting for me to say something. I didn't say anything. That night, after they both went to bed, I picked up the shotgun, put on my heavy coat, and stood at the mudroom door for a stretch of time I'm not going to say out loud because it wouldn't reflect well on me. Then I opened the door and went out. The cold hit the back of my throat like metal. -22 with wind is another planet. The kind of cold that narrows your field of vision, makes your eyes water and freezes the tear before it can fall. I went down the porch steps with the shotgun in my right hand, flashlight in the left, and stopped at the edge of the yard. The moonlight was faint, filtered through a thin layer of cloud. The yard was light enough to make out the shape of the barn at the far end, the line of the post fence, the side of the garage to the right. Nothing moving. I went. I kept my pace steady, didn't run, because running on ice means falling, and falling out there alone was a problem of a different order. Flashlight pointed ahead, shotgun across my arm, eyes on the garage, 10 yards, 7, 5. Then I stopped. On the left side of the yard, between the barn and the north fence, there was a shape, not a shadow. Shadows have soft edges. Shadows blend into the dark around them. This had volume. It was standing still, facing me, in a posture I can't describe in a way that fully makes sense. Hunched but tall, with that width across the shoulders that doesn't belong to any human proportion, the limbs too long for the scale of the torso. It stood at the edge of the barn's shadow, where the faint moonlight ended, and I could see enough to know it was looking at me. I don't know how I know it was looking. I didn't see eyes, didn't see a face clearly. But there's something in the way a living thing positions itself when it's focused on you that the body understands before the mind does. It was focused on me. I didn't move. How long we stayed like that, I can't estimate. Could have been 10 seconds, could have been a minute. The cold was burning the side of my face. A tear was freezing at the corner of my eye. And I was standing in the middle of the yard about 12 yards from that thing with the shotgun raised toward the shape and my finger on the trigger. Then it moved. Not fast, deliberately. It came out from the shadow of the barn sideways, without turning, keeping what I can only describe as its orientation toward me. I saw the movement of the limbs, that displacement with the wrong rhythm, joints bending at angles I didn't expect. I saw part of the torso in the weak moonlight, the fur in patches, uneven, with visible skin between the clumps, that texture that doesn't belong to any animal from around here. I didn't fire. I thought about that afterward, for weeks. Why I didn't fire. The most honest answer is that the distance was bad, the light was poor, and there was a part of me that still hadn't fully authorized it. That was still operating one layer below panic, in a place that needed to understand before it could act. The shape moved to the corner of the barn and disappeared into the dark on the south side. I stood there longer than I should have. Then I went to the garage, opened the side door with the key, went in, unlocked the truck, grabbed the CB mic, switched to channel 19. Static, channel 17, static. Channel 21, the one Daryl uses when he's on. A voice came through on 21, distorted, with that choppy quality of a weak signal. I said my name, gave my location on County Road F, said there was something on my property I couldn't identify, and that I needed someone to know where I was. The voice responded with something I couldn't fully make out and asked me to repeat. I repeated. The voice said it had my location, that it would pass it along. The signal dropped. I sat in the truck cab for a couple of minutes with the mic in my hand. Then I locked up, went out the side door, closed it behind me. The yard was empty. I went back to the house at a steady pace up the porch steps in through the mudroom, braced the door with the 2x4, walked down the hall and stopped in front of Owen's room. Opened the door an inch. His humidifier hummed low, the shape of him under the comforter was still. I pulled the door shut and went to my room. Sasha was awake. Light off, but awake. I know the difference in her breathing. I lay down. She didn't ask anything. After a while, she put her hand on my arm the same way she does in her sleep, except this time she was awake and she did it on purpose. I stared at the ceiling with that image fixed in my head, the shape coming out of the shadow, the limbs at wrong angles, the skin showing between the patches of fur, the scale of it, and the fact that it hadn't retreated when I raised the shotgun. It had moved sideways, it had gone around, as if what I was holding was a known variable, a calculated obstacle, something that changes the route but doesn't change the intention. That's what kept me awake until morning. Not the size, not what I'd seen, the fact that it had studied me before it moved. Wednesday morning, Sasha said she was taking Owen to her mother's place in Mineral Point. She didn't ask for input. She poured coffee, sat down across from me, and said there was something going on that I wasn't telling her, that she didn't need to know everything to make a decision, and that her decision was this. Owen was going to spend a few days with his grandmother. She'd be back the same day. I didn't argue. I helped pack Owen's bag, put it in the Subaru, hugged him before he got in. He looked at me for a second with the expression of someone who has a question, but decides not to ask it. Then he got in and buckled his own seatbelt. I stood in the driveway watching the car disappear down County Road F, and when it was completely gone, the relief I felt was so physical, I had to lean against the side of the truck for a moment. Not relief at being rid of Owen. Relief at knowing he was getting farther from here, that every mile between him and this property was another mile of margin. I went inside, made more coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and it was there, in the silence of the house without Owen and without Sasha, that I finally stopped and thought about what I'd been avoiding thinking about from the start. Why here? That was what had been circling just below everything, what I hadn't been letting come up. That area has rural properties for miles in every direction. There are bigger farms than mine, with more livestock, more activity, more domestic animals that would be easier prey than a human family inside a heated house. Why this property? Why this back door? Why that specific little window? I sat with that for a while, then I got up, went to the utility room and opened the work toolbox leaning against the back wall. In the bottom compartment under the drill bits, there's a notebook where I log my jobs. Date, location, depth, soil type, any complications. It's an old habit. Beginning of each job, I open a new page. I flipped backward from the end until I found the entry from 3 weeks ago. December 18th. Private property in the town of Mezomany, on the west side, near the point where Black Earth Creek bends before entering the preserve. Drilling a new well for a storage barn the owner wanted to build in the spring. Long day, tough ground, a shale layer shallower than expected that snapped a bit. I remembered that day. I remembered it because something about that place had been wrong in a way I couldn't name at the time. Something I'd filed away as tiredness. The ground was sinking unevenly away from the drill line, with those circular depressions that show up when there's a cavity underneath. Large animal burrows sometimes, or limestone dissolution. There was a stretch of dead vegetation in the wood line about 100 yards from the drill site. An irregular circle of trees with their bark stripped to about head height, like something had been rubbing against the trunks repeatedly over a long period of time. I'd taken photos of those trees on my phone because I thought they were interesting from a surface geology standpoint. I looked for the photos now. The marks on the trees were deep, parallel, with that same spacing I recognized now because I'd seen the same thing in the snow in my yard. But that wasn't what kept me standing in front of my phone for a long time. It was something I had completely forgotten until this moment. That day in Mazomani, I had cut myself. The bit snapped and the shaft kicked back and caught my right hand, on the outside below the thumb. It wasn't deep, didn't need stitches, but it bled well for about 20 minutes. I'd wrapped a dirty rag around it and kept working. Forgot about it the same day. But I had stood on that ground for hours with fresh blood on my hands, near those marked trees, near those depressions in the ground, near something that I didn't know was there. I sat in the utility room with the notebook in my lap and the phone in my hand, looking at the photos, trying to fit this together into something other than what it was becoming. I couldn't. Predators track by scent. I've known that since before any of this happened. I learned it when I started having trouble with coyotes. Learned it when my brother's dog followed my trail through 3 miles of woods in Portage just because I'd touched his pasture fence a few days before. An animal's sense of smell operates on a different scale. It's scent memory, an invisible thread that doesn't break with distance, doesn't fade with time. I had brought this here. Not intentionally, not through carelessness, not through anything I could have avoided without knowing what was on that property in Mazomani. But I'd let it here. 3 weeks between the day of the drilling job and the first night of the storm. 3 weeks for it to track me back, through the town of Mazomani, down Route 14, along County Road F, to the gravel yard of my farm, and the little mudroom window, the porch, the barn. It was learning the house. I got up, went to the utility room window, looked out at the side yard. Empty, flat snow, the north side oak with its branches loaded down with ice. Nothing moving. I picked up my phone and called Sasha. She answered on the 3rd ring. I asked if she'd gotten to Mineral Point okay. She said yes, that her mother was doing great, that Owen had already gone out to the backyard with his grandmother to see the ducks she insisted on keeping through the winter. There was background noise, her mother's voice, Owen saying something about the ducks. "Sasha," I said, "stay there tonight." Silence. "Caleb, what's going on?" "Nothing I can't handle," I said, which was a lie and she probably knew it. But it was the only thing I had to give her right then. She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, "Call me every 2 hours." "I'll call." I hung up, went to the hallway closet, grabbed the shotgun, opened the shell box, counted what I had. 23 heavy shot shells and 8 more of light shot that weren't good for anything relevant. Loaded the shotgun with 4, put 6 more in my coat pocket. Then I went to the kitchen window and stared at the barn for a long time. It had followed me for 3 weeks and 45 miles. And now I'd sent my family away. And I was alone on an isolated farm on County Road F with -20 outside, and a CB radio that cut out when I needed it most. Thinking about it now, I'm not sure it was the smartest decision I've ever made. But the alternative was letting it keep circling while they slept inside, and I couldn't do that anymore. I stayed up all night. Not out of discipline, not by choice. My body just wouldn't go. I sat in the kitchen with the shotgun on the table, the flashlight on the counter, the CB radio I'd brought in from the truck running on channel 21 with the volume low. The occasional static was company. Strange, but it was something. Outside it was quiet. Not the heavy silence of the previous nights. Not that smothered quality I'd learned to associate with presence. It was quiet in the normal way. Low wind, wood contracting in the cold, the north oak creaking along the main axis of the trunk. Sounds, I know. Sounds that belong to that place. Around 4 in the morning, the CB spit out a voice. Distorted, brief, but it was Daryl Kuntz. I recognized the accent before I made out the words. He's from Boscobel, has that flattened vowel that never goes away. He said my name, asked if I was on. I picked up the mic and said I was. He said he'd passed my location to his son, who was with the Dane County Sheriff's Department, and that his son said they'd send someone out in the morning. Roads were still rough but passable with their truck. He asked what was going on. I needed a moment. Large animal on the property, I said. I can't identify what it is. He was quiet for a second. Then he asked if I was okay. If my family was okay. Family's away. I'm fine. Stay on, Caleb. I'm here. I set the mic on the table and looked at the kitchen window. The sky was starting to shift far out on the horizon. That transition from solid black to deep blue that comes maybe 40 minutes before dawn. Not light yet, just the absence of the deepest layer of dark. I went to the mudroom. The door was braced with the 2x4 the way I'd left it. The little window was clean. No fog, no mark, nothing. The floor was dry. But there was a smell. It wasn't from the house. The house smells like old wood, coffee, the faint mildew in the corner of the mudroom baseboard that Sasha always tells me to deal with, and that I keep putting off. This was something else. Dense, with that damp base of wet animal, of something that has lived in an enclosed space and carries it in its fur. It was coming through the gap at the bottom of the door, faint but unmistakable. It was right outside. I picked up the shotgun. Stood in the mudroom for a stretch of time I'm not going to try to estimate. Then I went back to the kitchen, sat down, and let the smell tell me what it had to say. It had been standing out there for how long I didn't know. Hours, maybe. Or it had just arrived. But it was there, and it was still, and it wasn't trying to come in. It wasn't in any hurry. That haunted me more than anything I'd seen or heard that week. The absence of urgency. A hungry predator has a pattern. It approaches, tests, attacks, or retreats. What was happening here didn't follow that pattern. It was something else. Systematic presence, a circle closing slowly, learning the layout and the routine. And I kept coming back to the property in Mazomani, to what I'd seen that day and hadn't properly processed at the time. Not just the marks on the trees, not just the depressions in the ground. Late in the afternoon, when I was breaking down the equipment, I'd seen movement along the tree line about 80 yards out. I thought it was a deer. The silhouette was partially behind the trees, tall, with that stillness of an animal that spotted you before you spotted it. I watched for about 10 seconds and the movement was gone. Deer. That's what I'd thought. But deer don't have shoulders that wide. Deer don't stand upright. It had been watching me that day in Mazomani. Watching me when I had fresh blood on my right hand and the wind was coming from the north, carrying everything I was in that direction. 3 weeks ago. And something in that encounter, in that specific smell of a man with fresh blood on ground, that was its territory, had been enough. It wasn't Sasha, it wasn't Owen, it was me. I was the thread that led back to this farm. And if I was right about that, then sending Sasha and Owen to Mineral Point had been the right call. But it also meant I'd spent the entire week being the problem I was trying to protect my family from. The sky outside was light blue now. Not full day yet, but getting there. At 6:42, I heard an engine on County Road F, then headlights turning into the property. A Dane County Sheriff's 4-wheel drive pulled up in front of the house, and a man around 30 got out in the department's tan jacket and tall snow boots. I went to the front door, opened it before he reached the porch. He gave his name, said he was Daryl Kuntz's son, said he'd come out earlier than planned because the roads had improved, asked what was going on. I laid out what I had, the tracks, the smell, what I'd seen in the yard, the barn, the mudroom. He listened to all of it with that expression of someone assessing whether they're dealing with a stable man or not. An expression I recognize because it's the one I would have had if I were standing where he was. He said he was going to walk the property and that I should stay inside. I handed him the CB radio and told him it was better not to get out of range. Then I closed the door and went to the kitchen window. I watched as he crossed the yard toward the barn, his flashlight sweeping the snow, his footprints going in a straight line. The smell in the mudroom had faded with the growing light. But when Daryl's son reached the corner between the barn and the woodpile, he stopped. He stood there for a moment. Then he raised the radio and said something I couldn't hear through the glass. He turned back toward the house and looked at me. And the expression on his face wasn't assessment anymore, it was confirmation. Daryl's son's name is Kevin Kunz, and he found tracks. I'm not going to describe everything he described to me that morning, because some of what he said still hasn't settled into a form I can put in order. But the core of it is this. There was a pattern of marks around the entire property that he'd never seen before on any animal he knew. Not wolf, not bear. There hasn't been a bear in Dane County in decades. The marks came from the north, curved around the barn, ran along the east side, passed behind the wood pile, and went back out into the open field beyond the fence. A circle. Not complete, not closed, but a circle. He stayed on the property until mid-morning. Took photos, measured what he could measure, made notes in a small pad with a tight, slanted handwriting that reminded me of his father's. He said he was going to contact the State Department of Natural Resources and that they'd probably send someone out later that week. He said I should do whatever I needed to do to keep my family safe in the meantime. He didn't say what it was, and I didn't ask because sometimes the question and the answer cost more than you're ready to pay at that moment. After his cruiser disappeared down County Road F, I stood in the driveway for a while with my hands in my coat pockets. The day was clear, dry cold, no wind. The property looked completely normal in the morning light. The barn, darkened red by winter, the wood pile on the south side, the north oak with its branches heavy with ice. Nothing out of place. I went inside. Called Sasha. She picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting. I told her everything was okay, that Kevin Coons had come by, that the tracks had been documented. I told her she and Owen could come home whenever they were ready. She was quiet for a second. Then she said they were going to stay one more day in Mineral Point, that her mother was enjoying the company, that Owen had decided his grandmother's ducks needed names and was taking it very seriously. Something close to a laugh slipped out of me, the first one in days. "I'm okay, Sasha." "I know," she said, which was a loving lie, but it was hers. I spent the afternoon straightening up the house. No specific reason. The house wasn't in any real disorder, but I needed to do something with my hands that wasn't checking windows or counting shells. I fixed the mudroom door frame that had been loose for too long, refolded the generator tarp, replaced the back porch light bulb with a higher wattage one, the kind that throws a wider cone of light. Late in the afternoon, I called Merle Hess. This time he answered. I told him the essentials, no exaggeration, the way you tell a neighbor who's going to need to know. He was quiet while I talked and stayed quiet a little longer after I finished. "Caleb," he said finally. "Back in November, I found what was left of one of my calves at the back of the east pasture. I figured it was coyotes." I didn't say anything. "It wasn't coyotes," he said. I hung up and held the phone for a while. Outside, the sun was going down. That low sideways light of a winter late afternoon that turns the snow orange for about 20 minutes before the dark. I looked out the kitchen window at the east field, at the post fence, at the tree line beyond it. There was nothing there. Sasha and Owen came back the following morning. Owen walked in through the front with his backpack on and went straight to check on the P-51 Mustang on the shelf, as if the main concern of the whole trip was making sure the plane had survived his absence. Sasha stood in the entryway for a second, looking at the house, looking at me. I'd fixed the door frame, changed the bulb, left everything in its right place. But she knows this house the way she knows my breathing when I sleep. She put her hand on my face before she came in. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. The Department of Natural Resources sent 2 technicians on Thursday. They spent half a day, examined the marks that were still legible, took samples of the fur Kevin Coons had found caught on the wire fence. They said it would take a few weeks to get results, that they'd be in touch, polite, methodical, with the efficiency of people who do this often enough not to be surprised by it. I never got a result. Not because they didn't send one. They sent a letter a few weeks later, which sat on the kitchen table longer than it should have before I opened it. Inconclusive sample. Fur fragment with characteristics that didn't match any species cataloged in the state database. Recommendation to monitor the property over the coming seasons. Inconclusive. I folded the letter and put it in my work notebook, on the same page as the December 18th entry. Mezomany, Black Earth Creek, snapped bit, cut hand. What I can't close isn't what I saw in the yard that night. I've worked hard enough at it to build an image that holds up in my head without breaking me. I know what I saw. I know what it was. What I can't close is Sasha. She came back from Mineral Point the morning after Kevin Kunz's visit, like I said. She stayed. Life went back to the rhythm that life goes back to. Owen finished painting the Mustang and was already asking for the next kit. Normal. All of it normal. But 3 days after she got back, she told me that on the night she'd spent in Mineral Point, her mother had woken up at 3 in the morning because the ducks were making noise in the backyard. They went to look. There was nothing there, but there were marks in the snow around the duck enclosure. Marks that Sasha's mother found strange but couldn't name. Marks with wide, irregular spacing, coming in from the open field behind the property and going back out the same way. Sasha's mother lives in Mineral Point, 51 miles from here. This isn't going to end.